It was a Tuesday. Rain clung to the edges of the windows like fingerprints. I had just finished folding laundry, my old habit of creasing every towel like it still mattered, and was reaching for a teacup when the corner of the rug caught my foot. My hip struck the floor hard, sending a brittle kind of shock through my ribs. I lay there for a moment, blinking at the ceiling. I wasn't in pain. Not exactly. Just stunned. The paramedics were polite, if a bit too cheerful. They called me ma'am and wheeled me out like I was something delicate and breakable. My son, Daniel, arrived at the hospital with a face full of concern and a phone that never stopped buzzing. My daughter-in-law, Kim, was quieter, tight-lipped, a hand resting lightly on Daniel's shoulder like punctuation. "It's just a precaution," the doctor said. "Just a little observation," Daniel echoed. When I asked to go home, Daniel cleared his throat. "Actually, Mom, Kim and I have been talking. We think it might be better for you to stay somewhere with medical supervision. Just for a while. Just until you're back on your feet." I blinked. "I can manage at home. It was just a slip." "I know," he interrupted gently. "But what if next time it's worse? We already toured a place. It's beautiful, safe. You'll have everything you need. Everything but my own keys. Everything but my front door." They brought me to Briarwood Assisted Living the next morning. The lobby was clean. Too clean. The kind of clean that smelled like lemon and loneliness. A woman behind a desk gave me a brochure before I'd even said my name. "Welcome, Lorraine," she chirped. "You're going to love it here." I didn't remember telling her my name. They unpacked my suitcase without asking, hung my blouses on plastic hangers. My room had a single bed, a call button by the door, and a small window that overlooked the parking lot. "Just for a little while," Daniel said again, kissing my forehead. "We'll come visit all the time." Kim nodded behind him, silent. That was 3 weeks ago. They haven't visited once. The nurses are kind mostly, but brisk. They call me Han and Sweetie and ask if I need help standing even when I'm already on my feet. The food comes in trays. The walls are beige. The schedule includes things like bingo social and chair yoga. I don't do either. I used to be a high school English teacher. 39 years, 3 principals, hundreds of students. I taught Macbeth without notes and knew every comma in Gatsby. Now I am someone who needs supervision. The woman in the room next to mine cries every night. I don't know her name. No one introduces anyone here. We are referred to by room numbers. I am room 218. Today, a nurse walked in during my phone call to the pharmacy. She frowned. "We prefer residents to let us manage all medications." I said nothing, but something inside me folded sharply. Later, I called my home number just to listen to the voicemail. It didn't pick up. It rang and rang and rang. But here's the thing, no one thought to check before sending me here. I'm not confused. I'm not lost. And I am not done. Something isn't right. Daniel speaks too carefully now, with pauses before every word. Kim avoids my calls entirely. And yesterday, a CNA whispered, accidentally she thought I was asleep. "They moved fast. Sold the car already. The house goes next." I pretended to sleep, but my eyes were wide open. The days here don't change. Breakfast at 7, meds at 9, lunch at 11:30, even if you're not hungry. A walk around the garden, escorted, at 1. Group activity at 2. Dinner at 5. Then silence. Not peace, just absence. They call it routine. I call it erasure. The young man who brings the meal trays wears earbuds in one ear and hums 90s R&B under his breath. His name tag says Devante, and once when I asked for real butter instead of margarine, he actually brought it. "You remind me of my grandma," he said. "She was stubborn too." I smiled at that, but it faded quickly. Because I am not just stubborn, I am suspicious. 3 times now I've tried calling my old neighbor, Evelyn. She and I used to play Scrabble on Sundays and drink what we pretended was decaf. Her number goes straight to voicemail. I left messages. She hasn't called back. Yesterday I called the bank. I still remembered my access code. The woman on the phone paused when I asked about my checking account. "There's a note on the file, Miss Whitaker. I'll need to transfer you to our legal department." Click. Hold music. Another voice. "Ma'am, according to our records, there's a financial power of attorney on file listing your son, Daniel Whitaker, as primary controller of your accounts." I went cold. "When was that filed?" I asked. "April 8th. That was 4 days after my fall. I hadn't signed anything." At dinner, I didn't eat. I sat with the napkin folded perfectly in my lap, staring at the gelatinous square they called dessert. I remembered Daniel's voice when I was in the hospital, how carefully he had spoken, as if reading from a script. That night, I looked through the folder the staff had given me when I arrived, Briarwood Welcome Packet. Between the pages, I found a single sheet titled Resident Transition Checklist. One line jumped out at me. Property status, being managed by next of kin, sale pending. I pressed my hand to my chest, not because of my heart, because of the heat rising under my ribs. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't care. It was a transfer. I asked to speak with the director the next morning. Her name was Marla, smiling, stiff, and too polite. I asked how long I was expected to stay. Well, she said, flipping through a clipboard like it held scripture, your family has indicated this will be your permanent residence. My family? I asked. She smiled like that was answer enough. I nodded slowly, stood up, and said, then I'd like a printed copy of everything they've signed on my behalf. Her smile faltered. I'll see what I can do. That night, I sat on the edge of the narrow bed and pulled out my journal. It was leather-bound, a gift from a former student. I hadn't written in it for years. But that night, I began again. April 19th. They've taken my house, possibly my savings. They think I'm too old to notice. They've mistaken silence for consent. But I've spent my life reading between the lines. They've forgotten I taught literature, I taught betrayal for a living, and now I intend to annotate everything. I mailed the first letter 2 days later. Devonte slipped it into the outgoing tray without asking questions. To Evelyn, the envelope read. Just her name and the address of the little blue house next to mine, with the hydrangeas she never quite managed to kill. Inside I wrote, I'm not on vacation. I'm not recovering. I've been put away. I included the number of the front desk and the code they gave me to receive incoming calls. I wrote it in block letters, just in case her eyes were failing as much as mine were. Then I waited. The days passed in small betrayals. A nurse corrected my signature on a medical form. My prescription list had 3 new medications I'd never taken before. One morning, a financial statement, unopened, was placed on my bedside tray. It was addressed to Daniel, forwarded from my former address. I opened it. My retirement account showed 2 withdrawals in the past month. Large ones. There was a sticky note attached. Rachel's handwriting, probably. His wife. Transfer to renovation fund. New deck. Ask about permits. I read it 3 times. My pension was being used for a deck. Evelyn called 4 nights after the letter went out. Lorraine? Her voice was a tremble of both fear and fury. Where are you? I told everything. Slowly but clearly. The fall, the hospital stay, the abrupt move. What Daniel had said, what he hadn't. Evelyn had been trying to visit. Daniel had told her I wasn't well enough. He said you were having episodes. Memory loss, confusion. I almost laughed. I've never been clearer. She came the next day. Hair pinned back, church coat, eyes full of fire. The staff hesitated, then let her in. She sat beside my bed, took my hand like we were 12 again, hiding from chores. I brought someone, she said. Behind her walked in a younger woman in a gray blazer, no nonsense, carrying a leather folio. Miss Whitaker, she said. My name is Celeste Eng. I work with a legal advocacy group for elder financial protection. Evelyn contacted us. My fingers twitched. My breath caught. Finally, Celeste opened the folder. Before we go further, can you confirm, did you authorize a power of attorney? No, I said, voice steady. I did not. She smiled, brief but certain. Then we start today. That night, I didn't write in my journal. I slept instead. For the first time in weeks, I slept. Not because I felt safe, but because I wasn't alone anymore. Celeste came back the next morning. This time, she brought forms. We met in the common room at 10 a.m. in one of the small tables by the east-facing windows. Evelyn sat beside me, a thermos of real coffee in her hand, the smell almost making me weep. Celeste laid out the paperwork like a surgeon prepping for an operation. I've reviewed your financials, she said. I accessed statements from the last 90 days. Daniel had your mail forwarded to their address 3 weeks ago. She passed me a folder. Inside were copies of checks, transfers, logins from devices I didn't recognize. A line item read, $17,500, payment to Hudson Landscaping. Another, $3,200, charges at a furniture showroom. I didn't need to ask whose house was being upgraded. Celeste flipped to the last page. He also submitted a healthcare proxy under his signature, citing post-concussive cognitive impairment. It has no medical backing. The law says if you did not sign this yourself. I didn't, I said sharply. Then he's committed fraud. I nodded once. It didn't feel like victory. Not yet, but it felt like the start of one. We filed the first motion that afternoon. Emergency injunction, revocation of power of attorney, temporary financial freeze. Celeste moved like someone who had done this 100 times, but never with less care. People think elder abuse is always bruises and yelling, she said as we signed. But it's more often a smile and a quiet siphoning of everything you worked for. I gripped the pen tighter. I had spent 42 years as a public librarian. I indexed things. I helped children find words when they didn't know how to ask. I taught GED prep at night. I paid off my house. I lived modestly. And now I was a line item in someone else's backyard renovation. Evelyn stayed late that evening. The staff at the home grew cautious, polite. I caught them whispering. They knew something had changed. One nurse brought me an extra blanket without me asking. Another asked if I'd like my meals in the lounge instead of my room. It wasn't kindness. It was precaution. They could smell legal on the air now. That night, I sat at my little desk and opened a fresh notebook. The one with the cloth cover, the one Rachel had tossed in the donation pile, and I'd fished out before the move. I titled the page, Inventory of Self. Name, Lorraine Whitaker, age 73, former occupation, librarian. Current address, unwilling resident, Willow Hills Living Facility. Status, temporarily displaced, legally alert. Possessions, 1 wool cardigan, 1 stolen thermos, a lifetime of memory, 1 friend who never gave up, and 1 lawyer who doesn't smile unless something's about to be fixed. I closed the notebook and set it gently on the dresser. I looked at my reflection in the mirror above it. The lines on my face didn't bother me. The gray in my hair didn't sting. What struck me was the steadiness in my eyes. It was the look of a woman who remembered everything, and who finally had someone to remember it with. The court hearing was scheduled for Thursday. It wouldn't be dramatic, Celeste warned me, just procedural. But that was fine. I didn't need drama. I needed my name back. On Wednesday afternoon, a courier arrived at Willow Hills with a sealed envelope. It was addressed to me, hand-delivered. Inside were temporary orders from the judge. I was to be released from residential care effective immediately, pending a full review. There it was, in writing. The head nurse knocked on my door 10 minutes later. Her voice was syrupy. Miss Whitaker, we received some documents. There appears to be a change in status. Yes, I said, standing. There's been a correction. She blinked. I began packing. Evelyn came to pick me up. Not Daniel. Not Rachel. My coat was the same one I'd worn into the facility 6 weeks ago, still with a stain on the cuff from the hospital cafeteria. Where are we going? I asked, sliding into the front seat. You'll see, she smiled. We pulled up to a small yellow duplex on the edge of town. A porch swing hung from the front beam, slightly tilted. The siding needed washing. The windows were bright. Angela, Evelyn's niece, met us on the steps. A hospice nurse with soft hands and a sharp tongue. She gave me a hug like we were old friends. We set up the downstairs unit for you, she said. Kitchen's small, but everything works, and the thermostat listens better than most men. I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because I was still capable of laughter. Because somewhere between the garage of someone else's story and the hallway of my own, I had forgotten that. The space was modest. 2 rooms, a kitchenette, a wide window facing the street. But every item in it had been placed with care. A new lamp, fresh sheets, a kettle already plugged in. Angela handed me a folded document, simple, printed. Short-term lease. No cost, optional extension. Sign if you want. No pressure. No strings. Just dignity. I signed it slowly. Each stroke felt like rebuilding a piece of myself. Later that evening, I sat on the small love seat, tea in hand, knees covered in a throw blanket someone had knitted. Evelyn had gone home. Angela was upstairs. I listened to the clock tick, the gentle murmur of someone's television down the hall, the sound of life. I wasn't in a facility. I wasn't under supervision. I wasn't recovering. I was beginning again. Outside the window, the porch light flickered on. I thought about how many women never got this far. How many quietly disappeared behind locked doors. How many were told to stop asking questions, and how many, like me, had simply waited for one person to leave a door unlocked. The next morning, I woke before the sun. Habit, I suppose. Old women and soldiers, we both learn how to live without sleeping in. I made tea and sat at the small desk by the window. Beside the lamp was a folder Evelyn had given me before leaving the night before. "Take your time," she said, "but start here." I opened it. Inside, account statements, property deeds, and a long list of transactions bearing my name. But I hadn't made them. According to the records, I had sold my car 3 weeks after the accident. According to the state DMV, it was now registered in Rachel's name. According to the property transfer documents, the title of my home had been gifted. A word so generous it turned my stomach. To Daniel. Signed electronically. While I was in post-op care, drugged on medication I barely remember taking. There were bank withdrawals, recurring transfers, monthly stipends to support my living expenses, all approved through a power of attorney I hadn't realized I'd signed. My hands shook. Not from rage, from recognition. I had filed this kind of case before, helped clerks document guardianship fraud. I had even typed the final order of protection for a woman whose niece emptied her retirement account under the guise of emergency relocation. And now it was my name in the margin, my signature in question, my son's name beside every false affidavit. Angela brought breakfast, soft eggs and wheat toast, and paused when she saw the papers spread across the table. "You okay?" "I am," I said. I meant it. Because this wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was documentation. This was evidence. By noon, Evelyn and I were on the phone with her contact at the state's Elder Protection Agency. Celeste had already filed for an emergency injunction to halt all asset transfers, and she was preparing the next round of filings. Petition to revoke power of attorney, motion to reclaim property title due to coercion, fraud investigation referral. "I'll need a signed affidavit from you," Celeste said. I reached for a pen. "I've waited long enough," I told her. That afternoon, I wrote a letter. Not to Daniel, not to Rachel, but to the woman at the bank who had notarized the title change on my house. I remembered her name. I remembered her face. "I am requesting a formal inquiry into the transfer you processed. Please be advised, the document in question was signed under false pretense during a period when I was medically sedated and without my informed consent. I was not represented, I was not aware, and now I am no longer silent." That night, I sat by the window again. This time not as a mother grieving, but as a woman building her case, step by step. They thought I would forget. They thought they could outweight me. But I remembered, and memory when written down becomes proof. The hearing was held in a county courtroom on the edge of Harrisburg. Not the grand chambers, just a narrow room with tan walls and tired carpet. But justice doesn't need velvet curtains, just a judge who listens. Celeste stood beside me at the front table. On the other side, Daniel and Rachel sat stiff-backed. Rachel wore a gray blazer 2 sizes too expensive. Daniel didn't look at me. The judge, a soft-spoken woman with silver hair, began briskly. "We are here to address the emergency motion regarding asset transfers and power of attorney signed by Miss Lorraine Whitaker." Celeste stood. "We contend the documents were obtained under duress, during a period in which Ms. Whitaker was heavily medicated and recovering from trauma. We submit sworn affidavits, medical records, and a timeline that renders her incapable of informed consent." She handed over a folder. Not thick, just enough. "The truth doesn't need to shout when it has paperwork." Rachel stood, trying charm first. "There must be a misunderstanding. We were just helping Lorraine handle her affairs. It was all done out of love." The judge raised an eyebrow. "And was it out of love that you sold her vehicle and transferred her deed to your husband?" Rachel stammered. Celeste didn't interrupt. She didn't have to, because then the judge opened the last page of the file. The transcript. My recorded phone call. The one where Rachel had said, "She doesn't need a whole house. A garage is enough for someone who just needs to coast out the last stretch." The words filled the courtroom like cold air. The judge leaned forward. Her voice dropped. "This court is placing an immediate injunction on the property transfer and revoking financial access under the current power of attorney. We find credible concern for coercion and elder financial abuse. A full investigation will proceed." I did not smile, but I felt something loosen in my chest. Rachel's eyes widened. Daniel closed his. After the hearing, I stepped into the hallway. Celeste was speaking to a reporter from a local station, something about elder abuse law and procedural updates. A few feet away, Rachel whispered furiously into her phone. Daniel sat slumped on a bench, staring at the floor. I walked past them slowly. I didn't stop. I didn't speak. They weren't my captors anymore. They were just two people who had mistaken silence for surrender. That evening, Evelyn and I returned to the yellow duplex. Angela had left soup on the stove and a note by the door. Proud of you. There's still work to do, but today you took it back. I read it twice, because that's what this was. Not revenge. Not punishment. Restoration. I wasn't whole yet, but I was home. And tomorrow, I would write the first check from my own account. Signed, not stolen. The story didn't end in the courtroom. It rarely does. Legal victories are milestones, not destinations. In the weeks that followed, reporters began to call, first local radio, then a morning talk show, then a documentary producer who wanted to feature my case in a series on silent elder abuse. I turned most of them down, not because I didn't want to speak, but because I knew what I wanted to say, and to whom. I asked Angela to help me set up a small website, just one page. White background, black text. At the top, a photo of me in the garden behind Evelyn's duplex, my silver hair unbrushed, my hands in the soil. Below that I wrote, "They tried to reduce me to a signature, a burden, a name on a deed. But I remember who I am. I was never gone. I was just underestimated." Then I launched a foundation, Second Chair, named not after music, but after the courtroom, because I may never have been the one at the podium, but I was always in the room, watching, listening, learning. We offered small grants for emergency elder housing. We trained volunteers to recognize financial manipulation, not just bruises. We printed guides on how to revoke power of attorney and what questions to ask when someone says, "It's all for your own good." The first letter we received came from a woman in Tulsa. They said I was confused. But your story reminded me, I'm not confused. I'm remembering just fine. Another came from a veteran's widow in Ohio. I thought I was the only one who didn't know how to yell. Thank you for showing me silence can be strong too. I kept every one, tied them with blue ribbon, stored in a box under my bed, right beside the deed to my house, now legally and fully restored in my name. As for Daniel and Rachel, they moved 2 towns over. Last I heard, he was driving for a rideshare company. She took a part-time job at a dental office. The civil court ordered restitution, some of which was repaid. Not enough to repair the years, but enough to prove the harm was real. I have no intention of letting them back into my life. Forgiveness for me is not an invitation. It is a boundary. Angela visits twice a week. We play dominoes, make soup, and laugh more now. I sometimes catch her watching me the way a child does when they want to know if the world is still safe. And I always smile back. Not big, but steady. Because the answer is yes, as long as we remember. The last page I wrote for the Foundation website is the one people read the most. It's called For the Women in the Garage. It reads, "If they put you in a room and call it care, ask who holds the key. If they call you forgetful, write it down. If they say you signed, ask for the timestamp. You are not old. You are archived, and your story isn't over. The world didn't give me my voice. It just made the mistake of thinking I'd lost it. Now, every day I speak, not loudly, but clearly. In every folder I organize, in every woman I answer back, in every name I refuse to let disappear, because justice doesn't retire, and neither will I. If you've come this far, past the cold room, past the signature they tried to steal, past the silence they mistook for surrender, then maybe you know the cold too. Not just the cold of concrete floors or locked doors, but the cold of being dismissed, of being told you're lucky to have anything at all, of hearing your own name in whispers and paperwork, but never in kindness. Maybe, like me, you were once told, it's just for a while. We're doing this to help you. You wouldn't understand. Maybe someone called you confused when you were just quiet. Maybe someone said, don't worry about it, when you knew you should. I know that cold, and I know what it takes to stay warm inside it. Not anger, not noise, but memory, and the courage to make it matter. That's why this story exists. Not to punish the guilty, but to name the harm. Because harm that has no name gets repeated, quietly, legally, behind doors labeled care. I wrote this not just for me, but for the women who keep the receipts while everyone else forgets the debt. For For the ones whose children grew up but never grew kind. For the ones who gave their lives to others and were told to be grateful for the leftovers. For the ones who still ask, is this normal? No, it is not normal. It is not love. It is not what you deserve. So if you are reading this from a room you didn't choose, on a bed that's not yours, in a life that feels smaller than it used to, I want you to hear this. You are not alone. You are not imagining things, and you do not owe anyone your silence. At Second Chair, we keep listening. We answer calls. We read handwritten letters with shaky pens and angry hearts. We help file petitions. We say you matter until it doesn't feel like a lie anymore. Not every woman can walk into court with evidence. Not every woman can record the whisper behind the door. But every woman deserves someone who believes her the first time. And that belief, it starts here. So if this story moved you, if you blinked hard or clenched your jaw or whispered me too when no one was listening, then let this be your sign. Not to scream, not to fight, but to remember, and then to speak. In your own time, in your own way. Even if your voice shakes. Because justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it just shows up, in a story, on a screen, in the quiet click of someone subscribing to remind the world. We are still here. We are still watching. And we are still telling the truth. And that truth, it may come late, it may come quietly, but it never, ever comes empty.